In the summer of 2009, I was fortunate enough to work with the Ontario Geological Survey as a field assistant. Throughout the summer, I worked on 3 unique projects with the OGS. I began the summer working with Stuart Hamilton on his ambient groundwater project. Stu led his crew of 5 students throughout Grey County and the Bruce Peninsula, sampling residential well water in order to effectively map the relationship between groundwater chemistry and bedrock geology. Each morning, the crew would plan the route for the day, pack the trucks, and calibrate the instruments. Then we would all set out for a day of sampling. Driving was a common theme of the project since we covered such a large area and sampled 2 sites every 10 by 10 kilometers. We covered nearly every road within the Grey County and Bruce Peninsula. At each site, we would set up our equipment and begin sampling, filling each of the 11 bottles with well water, as well as taking temperature, dissolved oxygen, pH, and conductivity measurements at each site. The entire process usually took about 30 minutes. Then we would pack up all our equipment again and move on to the next site. What was so interesting about this project was that each sampling site was unique, so you never knew what kind of interesting people you'd meet or things you'd see. Back at the lab in our motel, the crew would take methane and iodide measurements from the previous day's samples, and data entry was an ongoing task throughout the summer. There was always a lot of work to keep us busy, but of course we enjoyed our free time as well. Everyone in the crew got along so well this summer, and we had a lot of fun working together as well as going to the beach on our days off and exploring an area of the province that few of us had been to before. After 5 excellent weeks in Southern Ontario, I said goodbye to everyone and headed north back to the office in Sudbury, where I hooked up with Kirsten Broneder to help her with her project.
Hi, my name's Kirsten and I'm doing my master's at the University of Ottawa with Keiko Hattori, and we're collaborating with Stuart Hamilton from the Ontario Geological Survey to work on a project on forest rings in Northern Ontario.
Forest rings are depressions in tree growth in a circular pattern, only visible from the sky. Little is known about the specific causes of these geographic phenomenon, but Kirsten is looking for the answers. In a few frantic days, we packed up everything we needed for 2 weeks in the field and pointed the truck north, heading to our home base of Hearst, Ontario. After a long rainy drive, we reached Hearst and began to plan our next weeks in the field. For Kirsten's study, she was focusing on 4 individual forest rings, each one very remote and difficult to reach.
You have to put the secta in the DAC bottles.
Every day we packed the truck with the equipment we needed for the day and headed out. Now that's how you test diffuser samplers.
Is it sealed?
Yeah, it's good. To reach the rings, we would drive down extensive logging roads, sometimes an hour before we could go no further with the truck. So we just arrived at the road ring and we're packing up for the day and we're gonna head out. We've got about a 40-minute quad ride ahead of us and we'll get to our site. Making sure not to forget anything essential, we would pack up the quads and then head out for the second leg of the trip. Across streams, swamps, bridges and fields, we drove deep into the Northern Ontario forests. Bisecting each of these forest rings, a number of monitoring wells have been previously installed. These monitoring wells were the sites we were looking for. Once we arrived, it was time to set up and sample. So, here we are at our first well of the day, after our long ATV ride in. And this is actually a background well, so it lies outside the ring, the forest ring. and there's a core absorber and 2 diffusion samplers in as well. And so we're going to analyze them for gas and methane, or hydrocarbons, right? The core absorber?
Core absorber is hydrocarbons and diffusion sample is methane.
Yeah.
But we're also hoping to get water sample out of here.
Yeah, we're going to try and get a water sample. So this is a comparison to all those wells that are within the ring. So we're just outside the ring right now. So anyway, this is our setup for the next half hour or 40 minutes. We'll do our thing.
Let's do it.
From the samples taken, Kirsten will be able to conduct a chemical analysis back at the lab and be able to observe any trends in soil and water chemistry between the area outside the rings and within the rings. This study will provide a better idea of what causes these unique forest rings to form where they do. So once we remove the diffusion samplers and the core absorber, we measured the water level as well as take 2 water samples from the well. And we've attached 2 more diffusion samplers to the fishing line. And we're going to put those back down the well hole, and we'll come back and pick them up in the fall and get another air sample. Working with Kirsten on her project was challenging, but also a very fun experience.
What do you smell?
I smell hydrocarbons. Whoa! There's holes everywhere. You want to hear my wolf? Oh.
Yes.
Everybody warned me about bears when I came up to Hearst to work with the OGS. But I think it's the wasps that are the bigger problem. I got stung in my hand and now look at it. We both lost a lot of blood to mosquitoes over those 2 weeks, but it didn't bother us considering all the other impressive wildlife we saw. It really is quite a unique experience to work in such remote conditions, knowing that you're the only human for miles around. Once all the sampling had been completed, we said goodbye to Hearst, our home away from home, and set off back to the office in Sudbury. Shortly after returning to the office, I was back on the road filled with excitement since I would be meeting up with the old crew. They had been working in Rainy Lake just west of Fort Francis with Richard Dyer on his lake sediment survey. After a 2-day solo drive around Lake Superior, I reached Rainy Lake. The lake sediment survey was an awesome project because one of the perks of this survey is flying around in a helicopter every day to get our samples. Thankfully, we had the world's best pilot, John Gibson, to carry our crew from lake to lake. Essentially, our days began with a hearty breakfast with everybody in the main cabin. Then the whole crew pitched in to prepare for the day of sampling while John refueled the chopper. Before long, the morning team was in the air heading for their first lake. The purpose of the survey was to land on as many lakes as possible and get both a water sample and a sediment sample. Both would be chemically analyzed back at the lab to determine chemistry and mineral content from lake to lake. As soon as John had landed on the lake and stabilized the helicopter, the person in the back would take a water sample, then jump out onto the float and drop the torpedo to the bottom of the lake. The torpedo is a specialized instrument which collects the sediment. As soon as the torpedo hit bottom, it would be pulled back to the surface quickly, then the person in front would bag the sediment sample. Once everyone was back in the chopper, we would yell "all clear" and be off in no time to the next lake. At the end of the day, every sample had to be hung up under the deck of the cabin to be dried. Meanwhile, other crew members would begin filtering all the water samples from the day's flight. Rainy Lake was an excellent home base for the crew. It was great for swimming and fishing, and often we brought home supper. As the summer drew to a close, so did the field work. It was time to close camp and pack up all of our samples and return home to Sudbury. On the drive back, I began reflecting on my summer experience and felt incredibly lucky to have had the opportunity to be part of each field crew this summer. I met so many good friends and worked on such interesting projects. It really was a great learning experience.